everyone, and welcome to another exciting day of English class. Today we're going to discuss the narrative essay, or the topic of narration. Narration simply means telling a story, and our entire course is built around the idea of you telling the story of your educational growth, your journey through college. So today we're going to focus on the elements of narrative, how to tell a good story, and how to grow as a writer. Now, narration is simply storytelling, and it can take many different forms. A story could be a joke, it could be a film, it could be an essay, a memo, it can even be a Super Bowl ad. Stories aren't just entertainment. Stories are the way our brain processes things. Our mind is this amazing organ that really hones in on different patterns, and it detects those patterns best when they're related to a personal story. I wanted to also briefly tell you about a smaller version of the narrative method where you apply an anecdote. An anecdote is a brief narrative that can be used to explain a simple concept or idea. So in our writing, we could have the whole piece of writing be a narrative, or we could just use the method of narration, like an anecdote, to explain some other concept. Now, the thesis of a story might look different than a normal academic paper, right? The thesis could be in the first sentence of a story, or it could be at the very end of the story. And I want you, for the purpose of narration, to apply the term thesis and telos interchangeably, right? The telos is the end purpose or goal of the story, and it's also what we would in modern, language call the moral of the story. I also want you to think about, when you're writing a story, what parts do you really need to pay attention to? You have to pay special attention to the very beginning of the story and the very end. Often they mirror each other. And the conclusion of a story can completely change the meaning and turn it on its head. I have a clip here from Planet of the Apes. I'm not going to play it for this presentation, but I'll link to it so you can watch it later. But the surprise ending of the original Planet of the Apes movie is the thing that gives the whole rest of the film meaning. And the person who is telling the story is the narrator. So all stories are inherently mysteries because there's information known and unknown to the audience. The narrator is in control of that mystery, though the author is the person who writes it. So I give you these three categories over here. The author is you, the person writing the story. The narrator is the person in charge of actually telling the reader the story. And the character is the person who is acting out the story. Now, the character can be the narrator, but they don't have to be. And the author, even if it's a third-person narrator, is not the narrator. The narrator is its own separate entity within the life of the story. And that's a little confusing, but I'll explain for our purposes how we'll see this. So there's a couple of different persons here. The first person narrator is subjective, meaning they are acting like a character. I walked across the street, I did this. We use the term third person to describe a narrator who is not actively engaging in the story. So the narrator says, he walked across the street, she bought flowers. Narrators often reveal the telos of the story, even if they don't themselves know the meaning of the story yet, because it hasn't played out. So just be on the lookout for the narrator slip in little hints about what the actual purpose of the story is. And just be aware that stories can take place in different tenses. So you could have a story that's currently happening, that's in the present tense. You could have a story that is happening in the immediate past, in the past tense. It doesn't matter for your story how you write it. You just have to be consistent. A present tense gives it a more active feeling, like a like a movie or a play, and a past tense makes it feel like something that's already in the past. So I wanted to read to you this opening line from Amy Tan's essay, Fish Cheeks, because I think it shows us a little bit about how narrators work. I fell in love with the minister's son the winter I turned 14. He was not Chinese, but as white as Mary in the manger. For Christmas, I prayed for this blonde-haired boy, Robert, and a slim, new American nose. Amy Tan, the author, writes a narrator who is a version of herself, right? It's a memory from Amy's childhood, but she writes this narrator in a way that actually reveals quite a bit of information about this narrator. How old is she? She explicitly says that she's 14. What ethnicity is she? Well, we know that she says here that she is Chinese because we know that Robert is not Chinese, implying that someone is, implying that this character is. And we know what she wants. Now, I ask a question that's really hard to answer in the first line of any story. What is the telos? What's the point, the end, the purpose, the goal of this story? But if you actually look at the physical end, the actual telos of the particular sentence, you kind of do get a sense of what the character's goal is, what the narrator wants, what the purpose of the story is. She says she wants a boy, right? This American boy, Robert. But she also says she wants this new, slim American nose. And if we fast forward to the end of the story, we learn a little bit more about Amy. This is after the embarrassing Christmas she had. She has this boy come over for dinner with his family. Her parents are really embarrassing. They have all these different foods that are not what you typically expect at a all-American Christmas feast. There's rude behaviors like burping and things like that, and she's just so embarrassed. Here's what Amy ends the story with. After everyone had gone, my mother said to me, "You want to be the same as American girls on the outside." She handed me an early gift. It was a miniskirt in beige tweed. But inside you must always be Chinese. You must be proud you are different. Your only shame is to have shame. And even though I didn't agree with her then, I knew that she understood how much I had suffered during that evening's dinner. It wasn't until many years later, long after I had gotten over my crush on Robert, that I was able to fully appreciate her lesson and the true purpose behind our particular menu. For Christmas Eve that year, she had chosen all my favorite foods. So you see, the character wasn't aware of the telos in the first sentence, but the author was. The author knew that Amy, the character, didn't so much want the boy, Robert, who by the end of the story is completely forgotten about and irrelevant, never to come back into her life. But Robert represented something of that, quote, slim new American nose that the character wanted for Christmas and prayed for. The character wasn't aware of it, but another character in the story, her mother, was. And the mini skirt here, this gift, is symbolizing this wish of Amy to become fully, quote unquote, American, whatever that means. Stories have a depth of meaning behind them, and that meaning is always personal. Right? Only you can tell your story. Right? I give you two quotes here, one from Joan Didion and one from the musical Hamilton. So Joan Didion says, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." And the name of Module 1 in this course was based on this line from Hamilton: who lives, who dies, who tells your story. At the end of the day, the only way we can gain some kind of authority over our lives, that word authority having the word author within it, is to write the story of our life and to take some type of narrative control. And that's exactly what we're going to do this marking period, this semester. So we're going to write one scene from our lives as a story. Now, what I mean by scene is that you are visualizing each event as if you were there in the moment. You're really portraying things. You're showing us using specific examples and images, auditory experiences, the tactile experience of feeling things. You're actually showing us everything, not just telling us about it. And you're writing using all 5 senses. Your assignment is to create a personal story. And you can make it an important moment in your life that really shows us something about the person that you are now or the person you were then. I want you to think of the 2 essays that we read this week and last week, Amy Tan's essay, which I just referred to, and Junot Diaz's essay about his mother and how his mother's life kind of influenced his. The key feature between all these different requirements is that it has a strong telos. You have a purpose in mind for your story, and that it conveys your voice as a writer. And I give you this brief quote from William Wordsworth because it talks about how each of our lives is comprised of these moments, these spots of time. And Wordsworth says, "There are in our existence spots of time which with distinct preeminence retain a fructifying virtue, when depressed by trivial occupations and round of ordinary intercourse, our minds, especially in the imaginative power, are nourished and invisibly repaired. Such moments chiefly seem to have their date in our first childhood." What Wordsworth is saying here is that in all our lives, there are these special moments that when we get bogged down with the busyness of our everyday existence, we can look back to these memories and these moments and somehow gain something new from them. And he says that our brains are nourished and invisibly repaired. So I want you to think, as you're going into this personal narrative, what moment of my life do I look back on and it somehow nourishes me? Some examples from students in the past have been the experience of cooking with their grandparents and having that one last meal that they got to share making with their grandparent. Some students write about a time when they were in a really dark place in their life and they found help. Someone else wrote about a job that they had that they were just really struggling in just to support their family, and then they, the way they had to manage that crisis. There's all sorts of moments, and each of you, based on your life experience, will have a different moment. For my friends who are more recently out of high school, this might be something from high school or something from middle school. For my friends who might be a little bit older, this might be a moment like the birth of your first child, somebody wrote last semester. So I want you to look back on these spots of time, these little moments, and try and bring that into this assignment. Okay. So while you're trying to figure out your idea, you're going to do a couple of pre-writing activities. I want you to first think about what you know. If you are someone who is interested in going into the military, you might write about that. If you're somebody who is interested in becoming a chef, you might write about that. You got to write based on you as a person and your interests. We're going to have a little bit easier time of this because we're starting with ourselves as a character. So think about what really brings you joy. You might even look back to our quick write from last week about what is peculiar about us and pick one of those things to kind of brainstorm your story. You can also consider outlining your story using some type of story structure. There's one called Freytag's Pyramid, and there's another one that our entire module is based on, the story circle. So I'll explain that in a moment. I also want to take this time to make you aware that there is an assignment that goes along with this presentation, a flip grid where you're basically brainstorming with your colleagues in class. So be aware that that's an assignment this week. So I explained in an earlier video that the structure of this course is based on the hero's journey. The brief explanation of this is every story has a set structure, and most stories fall into this pattern of 8 steps. The hero is in a zone of comfort. They want something. They enter an unfamiliar situation. They adapt to it. They get what they want, but they pay a heavy price for it. They then return back to their familiar situation, having changed. Each week of this course is focused on a different slice of this pie. We are currently in the first slice, which is telling us about you. You are our hero. So who are you is what we will develop over the next couple of weeks. This you module is all about telling the story of the person you are today. The goal by the end of this semester is to see how you have changed in that 8th step in the circle. So I wanted to walk through Amy Tan's piece as a model for this story circle. So we begin that story with Amy alone, reflecting on her experience and telling us what it is she wants. That's step number 2. Crush. She has a crush on this guy, Robert, and she wants to be more American. Her mom invites his family over to dinner, and you see how this is getting a little redder? That's because Amy is getting more embarrassed and more angry, right? She's entering an unfamiliar situation, and she has to adapt to it. She sees all the preparations happening for dinner, and it's starting to make her a little bit sad because she knows how different this is than what Robert used to. She gets what she wants. Robert does come over her house. It's kind of a date. But we see in paragraphs 5 and 6 the utter embarrassment of Amy's family, or the embarrassment Amy's family causes her in this moment. Right? 7, we see Amy actually gets this American gift, what she wanted, and her mom gives her this little example about shame. And then step number 8, we're actually back where we began. Amy is reflecting on her experience, but now she sees the event through a different perspective. That food that was so disgusting, she now realizes her mom went out of her way to get all of the foods that she really likes. And Amy, rather than being embarrassed by her family, is embarrassed a little bit by how she acted. And I think that's very relatable. As a 14-year-old, we all might look back and say, oh, I did something stupid there. I want to stay on this slide for 2 more seconds just to explain I chose these colors purposefully. The red, when it combines with the blue, becomes purple, right? So whatever happens at the beginning of the story combined what happens with the end brings us back to a more full understanding of the beginning. It's not just simply red anymore. It's now the story has imbued that red with the color blue and created this new version of Amy than what she was at the beginning. Each of us is going to have that in our own story. Whatever happens in this brief moment in time that you show us, it will have changed you in some way, and that's what I'm going to be looking for as I grade it. Now, we have a couple of things that we're going to talk about in another video a little later on, but I want you to think about your voice as a writer. And if you're not too familiar with voice, I'm going to break it down in another video. It's probably going to be right over there somewhere. So voice is the writing, which is the style that you apply in your writing, plus you, the author, the writer, the peculiar, individual that you are, plus the telos, the aim, purpose, or goal. So I want you to think of your voice as a combination of who you are, what you're trying to do, and the way you do it.